Hey there, Skullheads. I'm Snags.
And I'm Ol Silky.
And we're back on the attack with a Stephen King episode. But before we jump
90.
into episode 90, yeah, keeping track. That's good. Somebody's got to.
Madness.
Hey, go to snagsandsilky.com. Buy shit. Check out the links. Follow us on YouTube and Spotify. Hit up all your friends and send them snagsandsilky.com website. You must do that now, or you'll have horrible luck and die an early death. You'll be cursed if you don't send that website to everybody.
Christmas and Father's Day is right around the corner, so get you a mug. Get you a mug and a sweatshirt.
The Mexican Day of the Dead is coming right up. You got to send that shit out.
Yeah. Easter.
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Day, get you a sticker.
Easter, when the zombie rises from the grave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it Stephen King-like here, with the...
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
Well, so
anyways,
what's going on? We've had some shit happen.
Yeah, the most tragic thing that's happened recently is there's a music festival, the M3 Festival. David Lee Roth is performing again, which is great. It's good to see him getting back out there and shucking and jiving. He's headlining He's headlining one of the nights.
Accept is opening for him. That's cool.
That could be fun.
Yeah,
and then inexplicably, I think Dave is Saturday night. Inexplicably on Sunday night at this M3 Festival, you can just Google it.
It's up in Maryland.
If
you're in the DC area, go see this.
Inexplicably on Sunday night, the headliner is Piercy and DeMartini perform Rat songs, and the opener, the last act to perform right before them, the act that's opening for them, is the legendary godlike Ace Frehley.
Who is currently putting out listenable albums.
The only original member of Kiss who's still putting out listenable music, not to mention all the classic shit that he...
Well, his last album, 100,000 Volts, is actually a good record.
He's putting out decent hard rock albums, and he has been for a while, but and not to mention the legendary back catalog that fucker plays.
Oh, yeah. But like consistently in the last 8-9 years.
We get it. We get that. But I'm just saying, the legendary back catalog that guy plays from one of the biggest bands of the 70s, biggest glam rock bands ever, most influential guitar players on the planet, is opening, just in case you didn't get that, for Piercy and DeMartini play Rat.
Yeah, it's not even Rat.
No.
Bobby Blotzer, those guys, they're not there.
Whatever dumb fuck put together that lineup on Sunday night, it needs to be
it's
tied to a tree and whipped,
Uh-oh.
Hey!
It's El Condor.
El Condor in the house.
Check out the merchandise. We got hoodies. We got t-shirts. We got Funko Pops. We got Lego sets.
What's tonight's...
We got magnet stickers.
What's tonight's episode?
Stephen King.
Stephen King.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, say red rum. Red rum.
Red rum.
There you go.
Say it. Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Shine on, boy.
Just like in The Shining.
Shine.
Oh, goodbye, Dada.
Shine on.
You need to take them
out. Okay. Close the door. Brush your teeth. Parenting.
So that's the most tragic thing that's happened. Second most tragic thing that's happened in the last few days is Roberta Flack died.
Yeah, we lost Roberta Flack. And you want the scary one.
I know the in all seriousness, the most tragic thing is we lost Gene Hackman, legendary actor.
Yeah, Gene Hackman, his wife and dog all found dead in their house.
Yeah.
It just makes you wonder what the hell.
No foul play suspected. It's got to be, if that's true, it's got to be like either a gas leak, or they did a group suicide and decided to take Fido with them, which would really suck.
Yeah, it's just bizarre.
You don't. If you're gonna, check out, you don't take your pet with you. That pet has no choice. Give the pet to your neighbor.
Yeah. Definitely want to.
I'm thinking
look further into that as the days go on and see if there's any more updates on that. But Roberta Flack died, possibly the voice of a whole generation in the 70s. Classic R&B. You can't get any more R&B than that. She was.
Well, there you go.
He was huge. Not so much what Snags and I listened to, but I definitely recognize the legend there.
But so you were left, we're going to be talking about somebody who wrote about spooky, mysterious shit.
Yeah.
And it's a real cliffhanger here. What's the biggest mystery? Why was Hackman and his wife and dog all found dead at the same time versus why is Ace Frehley being forced to open for DeMartini and Piercy play Rat? It's hard to really decide which is the bigger mystery. And both could be the subject of a Stephen King book.
It's got us very verklempt here at the studio.
Yeah,
for sure.
And perplexed as well.
Yeah. So tonight's episode, Stephen King. As I go through this, Snags, feel free to discuss any movies, as we go along.
Yeah.
And
just a little
discuss them as we go.
A little backstory on us. Silky's the Stephen King maniac, has read all the books. I am not. I've seen a few of the movies, so I'll be the witty banter here, posing the questions of the uneducated audience. So
very nice.
Why don't you lay it down for us here?
All right. So first, there are many key moments in life that shape us or change us forever. And Stephen King was born in September 21st of 47. Now, his parents had adopted a child probably around 1945, and his name was David. Well, then they, Nellie Ruth, his mother, she gets pregnant and has Stephen. So now they have two boys. And when Stephen was 2 years old, his brother and him are on the carpet, classic 50s, or 1949, really. Just classic
post-war.
Yeah. Children playing on the carpet, TV on. Dad gets out of the chair, goes over and ruffles Stephen's head, his hair, and says to the wife, "Hey, I'm gonna go to the store for some," and was never seen again.
I think he said he's gonna go to a store for like a pack of cigarettes or something.
Yeah. And just gone. Go ahead.
Was there ever any resolution? Like, did they ever find out?
No, that's what I was going to say is years and years and years later, somebody asked him, would you ever search for your dad or look for him? And King's like, I'm not hard to find.
Yeah.
And, they asked if he would ever hire a PI or somebody to track his dad down. He's like, no,
But here's the deal. There's an assumption that the dad ran out on the family when he could have been murdered and fucking thrown in a ditch somewhere.
Yeah. He certainly may have come into foul play, but was never seen again.
That's crazy.
So you talk about shaping your life.
Yeah.
Now his mother would just work constantly to keep the boys fed and clothed. They bounced from place to place in Massachusetts and Maine, relative hand-me-downs, and just going without would be their normal situation. So I know our childhoods.
Yeah, that sounds really fucking familiar.
Yeah. So that's one key moment in his life. And then as a child, I played around train tracks. My cousin Jesse and I would stack coins on the tracks and run up on the berm that looked down on the tracks. And then when the train went by, we had like flattened coins, and you'd go to pick them up and they were like hot as hell.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I did that once or twice.
Did you?
Yeah.
So King, as a child, he witnesses a friend of his gets hit and killed by a train. And now King says he doesn't remember any of this. He's blocked that memory. But family members say he came home in shock and was speechless. And that's a huge, I think.
That's obviously bubbled up quite a bit in his writing.
Some disturbing. Yeah. And the movie Stand By Me was based on a short story called The Body, about a kid that gets hit by a train, and it takes place in the 50s, and the kids are like, hey, you want to go see a dead body? And so I think that all ties in. But I went and saw that movie. I was 15 years old, and when at the very end of the movie, Richard Dreyfuss narrates it, and at the end it goes back to him as an adult, and the whole concept is him looking back on a childhood memory.
Yeah, I saw it when it came out. I remember that.
Great movie. But the very end, now this is before streaming and all that shit. The very end is a song called Stand By Me, and I really liked that song. And it was one of those things where as it's playing, I'm like, I know this song. And so I sat in the theater. I would normally get up and leave with the credits, but I sat in the theater listening to this song
right
as the credits are rolling up. And somewhere in the credits, I see based on a novella or based on a short story by Stephen King.
Right.
And prior to that, anything to do with Stephen King, I was like, oh, horror, la, la, la. I didn't want anything to do with horror. But I was so captivated by Stand By Me that I went home and told my dad, I got to there's this short story called The Body, and it's by Stephen King. So I go to Oxford
Books. That's where we all used to go hang out and browse books back in the day.
And the difference between Oxford Books and any bookstore you go into now, you're more than likely going to run into a stalker who has no fucking clue.
Yeah, they had serious book nerds there that knew everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
So when I went into Oxford and I went up to the counter, I said, look, I'm trying to find this Stephen King story called The Body. And the girl went, oh, Different Seasons. Took me right to the paperback, hands me Different Seasons. And I'm like, well, that was really quick. And I let her walk away, and I flipped through, and there it is, The Body. I'm like, oh my God. And I might have just read The Body and nothing else, just read that story and be done with it. But my OCD probably kicked in. I'm like,
you gotta I think anybody's a regular listener here knows you got to be thorough about anything you get into.
Yeah. So I'm like, just read the other stories. Maybe they're just as good. And what's fantastic about Different Seasons was this was his, it was called Different Seasons, and each story was not so much horror as all his previous books. or short stories. These were 4 short stories that were on other things. Apt Pupil went into a kid who befriends an old man in the neighborhood and then realizes that this guy's a Nazi in hiding. And you're like, oh my God. And they made a movie about that one.
Yeah.
Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption is in different seasons. And that's basically a prison story that became Shawshank Redemption, which is one of Stephen King's best adaptations to movie.
Yeah, we were talking about that in the Tarantino podcast.
Yeah. So I have to tip my hat to Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, because I may have mentioned this in a previous episode that school came around. We're in school. I'm 14 or 15, and we had to read a book and write a thing. And we had this list of books that we could pick. And, everyone in class is like, oh my God, I want to read, and I'm going down the list and I'm just like, I'm not reading Wuthering Heights. I'm not reading Gone with the Wind, all these different books.
Right. And
here's Dracula. And I'm like, oh my God, I've seen so many Dracula movies. I won't even have to read this, And my dad went and got and I think my dad was blown away that I was suddenly expressing an interest in reading. And he was like, this is fantastic.
Right. Kids going places.
Yeah. So I read Dracula, basically dipping your toe in the water. And I love Dracula so much that I can honestly say since the age of 14, I'm either finishing a book or starting a book. I know Snags is usually reading 2 or 3 at a time. And
I usually read biographies. Yeah.
But books on tape stuff.
Yeah.
And I love nonfiction, but Stephen King, I love the escape of some really good, well-written fiction.
It's funny you mentioned Dracula because I did my little bit of prep. I watched a good bit of a Stephen King documentary, and he mentions in there they're interviewing him, and he's like, "Yeah, I was teaching." He taught literature a lot before his career. While he was writing his early stuff, he was also a teacher. But he basically,
I'll tell you exactly where he was at, but go ahead with your.
Yeah. So he said he was teaching Dracula, and he was shocked, and he was teaching it over and over again, like a few semesters in a row.
Right,
and
was part of his curriculum.
Right, and he said he was just really impressed with what a strong book it was. And then he said, what would it be like if there was vampire? He was teaching in a little small town in Maine. He's like, well, what would it be like if there was vampires in Maine? That would be kind of, and that's what got him on Salem's Lot.
Wow. Yeah. So I did want to mention that was my first introduction to Stephen King. So I'll go back to kind of the narrative. In high school, Dave King has a school newspaper that he was doing and just handing out. And then Stephen starts he began writing at 6 and 7 with his mother's encouragement. But he contributed short stories to this newspaper. Now think about all the Stephen King collectors and how some of this shit is thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah. I'll trade you my Lamborghini for that newsletter.
Yeah. So he gets in trouble when he contributes these short stories because he starts selling the paper to classmates without the teacher's permission. So this led to,
that's terrible. Making money. Can't have him doing that.
1959. So this led to Steve having to return the money, and the kids, but they stopped doing it. But for a brief little era, Stephen King had contributed some of these short stories, and So On Writing came out around 2000, and that's like a master class with Stephen on writing, and it's literally, I think he went back and kind of unearthed his teacher hat and really teaches you in that On Writing. If anyone has any inkling to start writing, it doesn't matter who's saying it. Everything in that book is what you do to write. With grammar, story ideas, subject matter, it's all in there. And then in between is just him relating childhood and kind of his background that he had yet to really say or talk about. So In Writing is a really good book. And then there was a Book of the Month Club edition of In Writing that was called Secret Windows.
Is it In Writing or On Writing?
On Writing. Sorry.
Yeah.
So On Writing. And then there was like this Book of the Month Club kind of mutated edition of On Writing, and that was called Secret Windows, and it basically collected some interviews and things. But in Secret Windows, he put a story called Jumper from 1959 and a story called Rush Call from 1960, and they are in there straight from Dave's Rag. Newspaper.
Straight out the newsletter.
Yeah. Now, Secret Windows, I had to search on eBay for about 5 years, and I got it from somebody in Canada for like $30.
Nice.
But it was very hard to find. I only heard about it by going through a recent book that had come out, and you know how books, you'll open it up and say other books by this author, and in this one copy of something listed Secret Windows, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? I don't know about that. And
gotta get it, or your collection won't be complete. Yeah.
Luckily, I tracked it down to get two very rare short stories that he wrote when he was a teenager, and you get these really, really good interviews in that book specifically. There's a story about him at some benefit dinner, and he eats something that's not agreeing with him. He's in there at one of these prestigious tables. It's all swank, and he's getting bubble guts, and he's just like, oh my God, I'm gonna shit my pants. And he gets up, and it's like really bad sweats, and the room gets long, and he's like, oh my God. And he gets to the bathroom, shuts the stall, sits down. It's a big, empty, quiet bathroom. And most people prefer that when they have to do something like that. And he sits down, and he's, literally relieving himself, just water shits. And somebody knocks on the door. Hey, can you sign my book? And he's like,
oh my fucking God.
Kind of busy,
That's hilarious.
So but it's I shortened the story, but he goes on about this in Secret Windows, and it's just classic. It's so fucking funny. But
well, he was talking about in that documentary how Misery was basically his exploration of how unhealthily obsessed fans can get.
Yeah.
And that's probably just one of many experiences he's had where somebody kind of invading his space,
Guarantee. We mentioned possibly in the Beatles episode how David Chapman met him earlier that fateful day.
Yeah.
And King signed a thing, and King's like, geez, he could have shot me,
Yeah.
And he wished he'd known he wouldn't have signed anything for the fucker. But anyway, so Dave's Rag, you got to wonder how much a copy of one of those would be. The University of Maine has a massive unreleased Stephen King. He's released things to be stored there.
Archive. Yeah.
And apparently connections to University of Maine, you can actually go in and actually look at some of this stuff. I would imagine with gloves on and supervision, or
Right.
But I read a book of it was somebody had done a book on his unreleased things, and I got it as a gift. It's not something I would have killed myself to get, but it was interesting. And they talk about each of these things that are up there, and as you read through it, you're like, God, I'd like to read that, or the guy gives a brief synopsis of each thing, so it's almost what you would remember.
And this is all just basically early shit that he wrote that never got published, kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Just so it's interesting, but The Glass Floor was first published in Starlight Mystery Stories in 1967. This is a year after he gets out of high school. Now, The Glass Floor was republished in Weird Tales number 298 in 1990, and that's the version I have. It's just a little Weird Tales collection, but it's like $13 on Amazon. But you get that first published story, The Glass Floor.
What's that about?
It's a long time since I've read that. I remember digging it. Somebody's walking on a glass floor and looking down, and that's all I remember. But it's a very you can tell in a brief way that it's Stephen King, but it's just a very primitive story. But it was just so cool to have that. And then
let me just read real quick.
Yeah.
It's the story follows Charles Wharton, who visits the Victorian mansion of his late sister Janine's husband, Anthony Reynard, to see the room where she died. Reynard claims Janine fell from a ladder in the East Room and broke her neck, but the room has since been sealed shut. Despite resistance, Wharton insists on entering and discovers the room's floor is made entirely of mirrored glass. Disoriented by the reflective surface, he panics, imagining himself suspended in midair, and ultimately dies in the room. Reynard later retrieves Wharton's body, leaving blood on both the floor and the ceiling, and questions whether the mirror was real as he reseals the room. Interesting.
Yeah. If all my stuff was unboxed, I would have pulled that out and shown you.
Yeah. You have your own archive.
Right. And then the other really cool thing, this came out in 1993. It's called First Words, and it's a collection of contributed early works of famous authors. And Stephen King has a story in there called Jonathan and the Witches that was written in 1956. And it's totally a story that a little kid would write and submitted it in class.
Right.
And it's like a page and a half or something, but it's not quite grammatically, there, but I was honored to be able to grab that. And again, First Words is on Amazon. You can probably find it for about $11 or $12 on eBay or something if you had to have that. I kind of poo it, but I have it. So,
of course, yeah.
But he wrote short stories to try and pay the bills and the rent while teaching English at Hampton Academy in Maine. So that's what you were. That's where he was at. And how crazy would it be to be one of his students, and watch him go off? But he sold stories to Cavalier magazine, which was a gentleman's magazine, Tits and Ass, and you turn the page and here's The Mangler in 1972.
The Mangler. Bukowski wrote for porn mags, but he wrote porn stories for porn mags.
Oh, nice.
I would love if there was somebody would
we need to track that down and see what
all those
issues.
down and make a compilation if they even exist. But he would write, basically penthouse letter type stories.
Right. That's awesome. But the Mangler was turned into a movie. It's about a press machine that comes to life and goes chasing off like a big table that smashes the
he talks
sheet.
about that in that documentary, how he's fascinated with machines and how much we depend on them and what it would be like if they turned against us. And you got Christine and Maximum Overdrive.
Yeah. And the Mangler is
sounds
really
like that fits the theme. Yeah.
The Mangler was dedicated to his mom because she worked in a laundry. And like I say, his mom realistically basically worked herself to death. I believe she got cancer later in life, but she did a lot at the laundry. And so the other key, I'm talking kind of a theme here, is just key points that were in his life. He marries Tabitha in 1971. They met in college, and they lived in a trailer. And Stephen King would write back in their laundry room at the end of the trailer. No heat. He's balancing, with the door shut, with a little typewriter on his knees, just cramped and trying to just get these ideas out.
Right.
With the pressure of, I have to sell a short story to Cavalier and maybe get enough money to, keep the lights on and shit.
Right.
And, so while he's doing that, Tabitha is working extra shifts at Dunkin' Donuts, trying to just allow him to write. She believed in him that much. And,
So did he ditch her for a trophy wife once he got famous?
They've been together for 50 years.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
They have 3 kids and a grandchild. Pretty damn cool.
That is cool.
So King is quoted as saying that he had 5 novels before Carrie. 2 were bad, 1 indifferent, and 2 were pretty good. Now, the 2 that were bad were Carrie and Blaze, which was a Bachman book, which would not get released until, I believe, the 90s.
So you got to explain to the audience what Bachman books are.
Yeah,
who Richard Bachman is.
So I'll do that. And that's really next. But the 2 that were bad were Carrie and Blaze. The indifferent one was Salem's Lot, and then the 2 that he thought were pretty good was Getting It On, which was ended up being Rage, the first Richard Bachman book, and then The Long Walk, which came out in 1979. That was Richard Bachman as well. Now, Rage is out of print.
Dying to know what Richard Bachman is all about.
I will. I'll tell you.
All right.
Rage is out of print. It's after a 1997 Heath High School shooting. And basically, he had too many high school shootings or public shootings where somebody said they read Rage. And he's like, Jesus Christ. And he it's out of print. You can't get it unless you have the Bachman books collection, that kind of thing. But at the beginning of King's career, the general view among publishers was that an author was limited to like 1 book a year. And publishing more would be unacceptable to the public. So King wanted to write under another name in order to increase his publication without saturating the market, is what the publishers would have been against. So he convinces his publisher, Signet Books, to print these novels under a pseudonym. So he releases Rage, The Long Walk, Road Work, Running Man, and Thinner. So 5 books that were not quite horror. They had other things, and he kind of just got tagged right away. Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, those were all very much horror, and so it was like, write what you know. Everything was cookie cutter. You're a horror writer. You're a science fiction, And
Right.
he, as a writer, he wants to do other things. So, Running Man was very much sci-fi. Roadwork is about a guy that goes nuts in his house and kind of takes on the police because they're building a road by his house. The Long Walk is very much a sci-fi thing where these children are having to go on this like a marathon, and if they fall down, if they get tired, these guards will shoot them, and it's the long walk. The last person standing wins.
Interesting.
Really, really good book. And Rage, as reading that in high school, you understood the angst and the anger just at life itself. But Rage, the kid goes into the classroom and takes on his teacher. And so, a normal kid reads that and goes, yeah, fuck my math teacher. I'd like to shoot that bastard, but you don't really do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, in 1985, this guy, Steve Brown, is a bookstore clerk in DC, and he notes similarities between the writing styles of King and Bachman. Now, at the time, you could go get these first 5 Bachman books for really like 60 cents, these little paperbacks. And on the back of Thinner, which came out in 85, right when this happened, there's this picture of a guy. And it was just somebody that King paid to, his picture to be the author photo.
And this is before the internet, so you can't have it took a lot longer for the public to figure shit out.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame because it was a fun thing, I think, that King enjoyed. But this guy notes the similarities in the writing styles, and he locates the publisher's records at the Library of Congress, which includes a document naming King as the author of one of Bachman's novels.
Oh, there you go.
So Brown
Cat's
writes,
out of the bag.
So this fucking troll writes to the publishers with a copy of the documents he'd uncovered and asks them, what do I do with this? And 2 weeks later, King telephones this guy and suggests that he write an article about how he discovered the truth, allowing himself to be interviewed. So he basically, that's how cool King was. Is like, you got me. Go ahead and interview me, But at the time of the announcement in 85, King was working on Misery, and he had planned to make Misery a Bachman book and then changed his mind after all the shit went down.
Right.
And, the next Bachman book wouldn't be until 1996, which is The Regulators. And I'll talk about The Regulators in a bit. And then Blaze, actually, that first book came out in 2007. And Blaze is a great book. It would be cool to see that adapted into a movie. But
and when you talk about The Regulators, are you going to talk about why he released it as a Bachman book after the cat was out of the bag?
Yeah, he basically it didn't quite fit his other stuff, and he decided to act like it was a long lost Bachman book.
Okay.
And so there's like an introduction in that one where he's like, the wife says he died of cancer of the pseudonym, and which is a fake name for somebody.
Yeah, I know what a pseudonym is. Yeah,
I know, but our listeners might not.
Yeah, that's true. Y'all are a bunch of stupid fuckers.
Well, yeah, they're but anyway,
might not know.
They might not know.
Yeah.
But it was decided to be a long lost Bachman book, and then Blaze, which was 2007. He just had, gone back through and found the original manuscript. It's like, this isn't too bad. And he touches it up and put it out as a Bachman book. But
Cool.
anyway, so Carrie, he'd written like a 3-page draft and just it's mainly that opening scene where Carrie's in the shower at school and has her first period, and he just didn't quite know what he would do because he's a guy and this is about a girl, and it just wasn't grabbing him, and he just threw the pages in the trash. And Tabitha pulls them out of the trash, reads it, and says, this is good. And she gives him some advice and kind of shapes, gets him back on track with it. And he turns it from a little short story, which he was going to send off to Cavalier. And meanwhile, he's sitting on these 5 novels that he just doesn't feel confident on.
Right.
And then he turns it into what we know and love. His editor, Bill Thompson's the guy. He was key in helping him form Carrie into an acceptable novel.
So that's basically what made him famous.
Yeah.
And so his wife pulling that out of the trash,
it's
very likely dramatically affected his life.
Oh, absolutely. This is another key moment. Like, it's the theme of this whole episode.
Right.
But similar to Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he wrote that and was so horrified by it, he threw it away. His wife dug that out and said, "This is fantastic.
Right.
Here you go." To this day, we wouldn't.
One of the interesting things he said about Carrie in that documentary was that the theme is blood, and it's like it's about literal blood, the menstrual blood, the blood from all the gore. And he said it's about blood of family ties.
The mother and daughter.
And there's just having bad blood between people. If there's one theme to that book, it's blood in all the various ways. It's
a lot of layers of blood, basically. But so these meddling wives going in our trash cans and taking our writings out.
There you go.
But no. So in 1973, Carrie gets picked up by Doubleday. Now, at the time, King's got no heat. He's got a 4-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son, and no phone. And Bill Thompson's trying to call King up and let him know, I got you signed, So Bill Thompson literally drives out.
Who's Bill Thompson?
He's an editor at Doubleday.
Okay.
Who King had submitted Carrie to.
Got it.
So Bill Thompson had literally had to drive out to Stephen King's trailer in the snow with this check for $2,500.
Nice.
Now, at the time, like I said, he's scratched. He's like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next week.
Right.
And here's this check for $2,500, which at that time, 1973, that had to be like $10 million,
I mean, that would have been buy a shitload of ramen noodles for sure.
Yeah. And then it got, it took off. It got the movie rights. I mean, this all happened within 2 years.
Yeah.
And Carrie just took off. Sissy Spacek knocks it out of the park.
Now that film is
John Travolta.
Amazing. That's an amazing film.
It's just
really
ridiculous. Yeah. John Travolta's in there. Sissy Spacek, a ton of people. Fantastic portrayal.
John Carpenter, right?
No.
Hold on, let me see who directed Carrie.
Not Coppola. De Laurentiis.
De Palma.
De Palma. I knew it was a D.
Yeah.
De Palma directs it, but the mother, I think it was like Tuesday Weld played the mother, and the what always appealed to me in Carrie was the psychotic religion, the
Yeah,
fanatical.
that's one thing I think we can both relate to, and that's something that shows up in his writing. It's a theme because I think he was raised by fundamentalist nutbags.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was Piper Laurie, I think.
Piper Laurie. Okay,
Yeah.
I was saying Tuesday Weld.
Yeah.
Phenomenal performance. But
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's
that's
been
a
remakes of Carrie, and they're
chilling. Yeah, I haven't even bothered with that, but I mean, I there's something deeply disturbing about that mother in Carrie.
Yeah.
Almost more disturbing than all the gore and the.
Oh, absolutely.
There's just something really disturbing about the mother in the film. I haven't read the book.
Yeah. But so just this is a new author, and listen to these titles: Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining. Night Shift would collect a ton of his Cavalier short stories. A very essential book, Night Shift, because you get a glimpse at his early writings. Rage, which we talked about, The Stand, which is the superfluous. It's amazing. Most King fans would just rave about The Stand. The Long Walk, which is a Bachman, Dead Zone, Firestarter, Cujo. Now, one thing about Cujo, he wrote that he was so blown out on cocaine, he literally does not remember writing Cujo at all.
Interesting.
But he's that talented. It's a good book.
I remember.
Really good book.
Well, that's like Bill Ward was so blown out on cocaine, he doesn't remember drumming on Heaven or Hell.
Really? Yeah, he checked himself into a.
Yeah, he doesn't remember drumming. His drumming is amazing on that album.
Yeah,
and he doesn't remember it.
Beats the brakes.
The one thing that Stephen King said about Misery, and I don't know where I read this. I think it was an interview. Was that he realized after he wrote it, it was an analogy for his cocaine addiction, and that the woman who's torturing the writer is his addiction.
Wow.
So he talks a lot about how he learns about himself through writing.
Stephen King would get up like a job. He would get up at 8 a.m. and he would write, I think it was like he'd write a page a day or a page and a half, and he would just sit and very much focus and actually put shit out,
Yeah.
That's how he's able to release so many things. But you cannot talk about Stephen King without bringing up The Dark Tower. And The Dark Tower, he started writing the first book in 1970. He found a whole ream of bright green paper at the library at the University of Maine. He talks about him and Tabitha, and they weren't quite dating yet, and this other guy who became an author as well. All three of them were laughing at these different colored stacks of paper, and King grabbed the green one. Tabitha grabbed like a blue or purple one, and whatever this other author, I don't remember who it is. But King started writing The Dark Tower, and they were originally published in a magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And so I have those actual releases of those magazines, and it has the 5 stories that made up The Gunslinger. And then in it took like 12 and a half years to finish the novel, but the finished product was published by Donald Grant in 1982. That version, he compiled all 5 of what were in those magazines, released between 78 and 81. That hardback is like 1,200, something insane.
Do you have that in your archive?
No, I have. They did a book on tape back when you and I were living on Courtney, and that was the only way you could get it.
Back during the sink or swim years.
Yeah. Exactly. That was the only way you could get that in a remotely affordable fashion. You had to have $1,000 at Oxford too up top, the collectible,
and some glass case with the lock on it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it was just highly sought after, but you had it as a book on tape, and then later they're like, that was the only way you had it. And then later, they put out a trade paperback of it, and that's the version I had forever. And then even far later, 2003 or something, they put out a hardback, and I snatched it up because somewhere along the way, I started replacing my paperbacks with hardbacks of each one. And so now my collection is all hardbacks, most of them first.
There you go. Yeah.
Just beefed it up and made it a nice looking.
That's important. So when you look at it, it looks more respectable. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Dark Tower is basically King's version of Lord of the Rings. It's his Lord of the Rings. It's just an epic journey that's like a Western sci-fi fantasy. No swords, just a lot of gunplay. And it ends up being 9 different stories. The Gunslinger, Drawing of the Three Wastelands, Wizard and Glass, Wolves of the Calla, Song of Susanna, Dark Tower, and The Wind Through the Keyhole, and then a novella, Little Sisters of Eloria. But that's a prequel to The Gunslinger. And The Gunslinger is just this larger-than-life story that he has run through. A lot of his books will reference other people that were in other books of his. So he creates his own little universe. And the Gunslinger, the Dark Tower, is kind of the whole. It's all through his book. They mention references of the Gunslinger are in Salem's Lot, Shining the Stand, Insomnia, Hearts in Atlantis, Black House, Eyes of the Dragon, and The Cell. So that list of books right there runs a huge cross section of his.
Was Oxford 2 over at Peachtree Battle?
No,
or was that chapter 11?
They had an Oxford 2 over there, but you had Oxford down in Peachtree Battle Shopping Center, and then up next to Turtles was an old house, and that was Oxford 2.
There was an Oxford over on Far Road, but yeah. But I remember us being at the bookstore down at Peachtree Battle. I think it might have been chapter 11 books. It's down in Peachtree Battle Shopping Center, and I remember you yammering on about it was either The Stand or the Dark Tower. And
I could have been Dark Tower.
Yeah,
the tapes were incredible.
You were yammering on about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah."
Well, you'd have dug it if you'd listened to it, but
probably yeah. No, I mean when I love the film versions of his stuff, but it's just funny having that just random memory of us down there, and you're like, man, this, and it was some big epic Stephen King book, and you're like,
it might have been The Stand though, because that shit that blew my fucking.
It was
mind.
One of those two, and you were. I just remember you raving about it.
They expanded The Stand. He had originally they'd cut like 500 pages out, or something insane, and that book was huge anyway. It was a fucking doorstop. It was a damn telephone book, and so in '90 they gave you an unabridged version because hey, he's Stephen King,
right? That may have been what you were raving about. Yeah.
So if you look, just where we're at here, obviously we're not going to go in and describe every fucking. This guy's written 65 novels. He has 12 collections of short stories.
That's crazy.
And then 5 nonfiction releases. But if you look at in the 70s, he had kinetic powers was a huge thing with his stories. Carrie, The Shining, The Stand, The Dead Zone, and even into 1980, Firestarter. Those were all mental power type books. And
the Dead Zone's another incredible movie. Christopher Walken is just amazing in that.
He knocks it out of the park. And before Dead Zone, Christopher Walken had done The Deer Hunter, but before that, he was basically a random bad guy on Kojak, or he did a couple Hawaii Five-O's. So he was just here and there.
Which leads to the fact that we're going to do a 70s cop show episode.
Yeah, we have to.
Silky has seen... I grew up with him, and I've got some background on the like Rockford Files and Starsky and Hutch. But this cat I used to watch Baretta and the Rookies. This cat is an expert on 70s cop shows. That's why he knows about Chris Walken showing up in them.
Well, they're just so entertaining because you never know who's going to show up. There's a Kojak with Stallone in it.
Yeah.
You know? And because of that, it's why I check that shit out. Because we're
gonna do. I know. I get random texts from this guy. Oh my God, Perry Como's in Maverick.
Yeah,
whatever. I guess Maverick is a '50s thing, but you know what I'm saying.
No, but I enjoy the shit out of that when I go Martin Sheen in Hawaii Five-0.
You should be watching this.
It's tremendous. But
Leonard Nimoy and fucking Ironside. Oh my God.
Yeah, you fucking whore. Yeah. So that's the kinetic powers. Then you had the epic vampire. Salem's Lot is probably his best book ever. He goes into, like you had said, a small town, but as you read Salem's Lot, he's got this character and this character, and they're so believable that as you're reading it, you're picturing this one over here, and this is going on. And it's like, how are you spinning all these plates and managing to keep it all connected? And books that have 80 different characters are usually very, wait, who am I? Who is it? For me. But he does it so fucking, and that's his second book, and it was written before Carrie, really. So it's like, this guy's just amazing to me. Then you got the we talked about Cujo, the evil dog, the evil car, Christine, another fantastic movie.
Now that one was John Carpenter, and he said,
I think that was John.
They talked about 2 of the movie adaptations in that documentary. One was Christine, and he said he loved Christine. He said when he saw that film, he was laughing all the way through because he was just shocked, overjoyed at how much Carpenter understood what he was writing.
Wow, that's great.
And the other one, which is considered a classic, and I love it, is one that he really didn't like, which I'm sure you'll get to, was The Shining. He really did not like Kubrick's adaptation.
I'll tell you why. His reasoning is that Nicholson had just won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and now he's going to play Jack... I forget the last name in The Shining, but he's going to play this guy. And what he wanted in the book, you see a father and an author who wants to take his family up and just escape from all the hustle and bustle and work on his writing. And then you slowly see him turn fucking crazy. And then they get Nicholson to play this guy, and And King was like, "Fine, this is no stretch at all. Everyone's waiting for Jack to raise his eyebrow.
Nicholson's already crazy. Wow.
It's already crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was and I get that, but goddamn, The Shining is fucking amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Blood coming down the hallway out of the elevator. The twins come play with us. Holy shit! It just
it's an amazing film. There are a lot of theories about The Shining too. There's a whole documentary about the symbolism in The Shining.
Yeah, which gets a bit stretchy, but
but it's one of those movies though that people obsess about and dissect, and there's all kinds of theories that about what it's about. You know, it's a deep multi-layered cinematic masterpiece.
And you could watch that documentary like 2 or 3 times. I think it's called Room 207. Something like that. Great. There's so much in it. I've watched it a couple times. It's very fascinating. But so you got all these books. Each one was better than the last one. I mean, he was just on fire. And then Pet Sematary, the dead come back to life. Cycle of the Werewolf was, hey, Steve, what if we did a calendar and each month you did something? And then he got obsessed with that and it was going to be a calendar. And then it turned into a short story. I believe there's a version of Cycle of the Werewolf that is a calendar, and you've got the text of the story underneath each month. Which again, millions of dollars, nobody, but there's a trade paperback that I still have, Cycle of the Werewolf. I believe it's kind of like a comic book, if I recall. No, it's like a book, but Bernie Wrightson, who did comics, does some illustrations throughout, and that's just a cool little mini novella thing. And they made a movie of that called Silver Bullet, which was fun. And then he co-writes with Peter Straub, who was another amazing kind of horror writer. But I mean, you got Stephen King up to that point. He owns the horror genre at this point. Nobody can touch all these. I mean, we've covered all these, but it's fucking crazy. Somehow Peter Straub gets tapped. Hey, I like that. What if you and I wrote something? And Peter Straub talks about, holy shit, Stephen King's on the phone. His wife's like, yeah, it's Stephen King. He's no fuck. He thought it was a joke, and, but they wrote The Talisman, and The Talisman is a fucking amazing book about a boy who goes on this journey to try and save his mother, who's dying of cancer. And that's Stephen King's mother dying of cancer.
Wow.
But the symbolism, once you know that, the kid goes, on this journey, and he's too young to be on the road, and he runs into some bad people, but then somehow he has this talisman, and when he touches it, very much like Bilbo Baggins in The Ring, he crosses over into the Barrens, if I remember correctly. I could have that wrong, and some King fan's going to shoot me, but he goes over to this other world and befriends this guy that's basically a werewolf, and him and this werewolf go through, and while they're on the other side, time slows down. They're able to travel further, but then they kick back over, and he's trying to get out to California. But so The Talisman is this amazing kind of journey, similar to Tolkien, again, the Lord of the Rings stuff. And then many years later, they do a sequel to The Talisman, which made me have to go back and read The Talisman. And then Black House is the second book. But I will tell you, Black House is its own story. And again, a fantastic book. And sometime next year, The Talisman Book 3, King is going to kind of finish off the whole thing, which is a total surprise. Did not see that coming. And then, so I just touched on The Talisman, but then 1986, that's an homage to all the Universal 30s horror. If you read it, there's a vampire, there's a mummy, they're all in there.
Right.
And it's a fucking amazing, really a coming of age book. Children dealing with horror. King grew up in the 50s with Sputnik and all the
nuclear
bomb
paranoia and all that. Yeah.
all of it, man. So it really comes together there. And then Misery's the next book, and you're like, how does one guy write all these epic? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Misery, you talked about it. Just an epic book. The movie is done fairly well, for sure. But in the 90s, he was nonstop. Needful Things, Gerald's Game. And what's crazy, Gerald's Game is about a woman who is about to fuck her husband, and the husband has a heart attack. But before he has a heart attack, he's tied her to the bed. So she's
oh man,
they're in his cabin, and she's literally tied to the bed.
Oh wow.
And he's keeled over dead on the floor. And while she's laying there tied to the bed, she's thinking back on different moments of her life. But the radio's on, and they keep talking about this psycho killer that's escaped and is out. Lock your doors, lock your windows, and you know what's coming. Eventually he kind of appears in the room, and she's in and out of consciousness, naked, strapped to the but Gerald's Game is just amazing. But then Dolores Claiborne does this mirror thing where one scene in Dolores Claiborne, they're looking through, there's an eclipse. And during the eclipse, the little girl in that story sees the woman on the bed.
From the other book.
And the one came out right after the other one, but you're like, what the fuck? It just,
Right.
You could tell he was smoking some really good shit.
Oh yeah. Fine brick of hash. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so that was a really trippy, both of those have been made into movies. Needful Things was a movie. Insomnia, I just did not like that book.
Wait, so Gerald's Game was a movie?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Naked woman strapped to a bed for the whole movie?
I bet she's got a t-shirt on. I don't know. I don't remember. But so in 95, I'm working at Tower Records, and they have this CK1 Calvin Klein perfume.
Right.
And the scent of this shit was so to me, it smelled like cat urine. Okay.
And they're selling it at Tower Records?
They're selling it. It's just a little bottle, like a tester up at the counters. And you could buy some of these bottles.
Okay.
And, one Saturday morning, something like that, 1995, I'm there, stocking the book side. Right. And there's a guy, with like a puffy jean jacket or something, just an old man, whatever. And I'm, 24. And this guy is walking around, and I'm like one aisle over. I'm like, hey, if you need any help, I'm pretty familiar with what's in here. And, oh, thanks. I didn't recognize any voice or anything, And then I'm up behind the counter there, and I'm putting stuff away, and I can tell the guy's walking up, and I look over, and I still haven't looked at the guy's face. They've picked up the CK1, and I'm like, oh, don't spray and he sprays his wrist, and he looks at me horrified, like, what did I do? And I'm like, it stinks to high, and I realize who I'm talking to.
Stephen King?
Stephen King. And he's like,
wow.
He goes, oh my God, that does stink. I'm going to smell like this all day. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And he's just like, he's like laughing. He's like, this really stinks. And I'm like, but I said, even though you did that, would you sign? And he's like, yeah, go grab some. And I grabbed Rose Matter, which was the newest book that had come out.
Right.
And it is a tremendous, tremendous book. It's about a battered woman who's running away from her abusive husband. And then there's like, again, this trippy shit where she goes into these framed pictures, kind of like a picture of Dorian Gray.
All right.
Reversal, that classic goth horror. But he signed Rose Matter to me, and I still have that.
That's nice.
But it's just hilarious. That CK1 story, I had to get that in here. But so there's certain books that you have to mention. We've covered most of them. I have skipped a few that they're good, but I want to touch on The Green Mile. Came out as a 6-part release because Stephen King, one of his pet peeves is people getting the new book, flipping to the back and reading the last chapter to know how it ends. Like certain people don't just start at the beginning and read to find,
that's never even occurred to me to do that.
It's never occurred to me either,
yeah.
But it's a thing. And as I've told this before, people go, oh, I do that all the time. I'm like, oh my God. It's like somebody saying they eat their own fucking boogers or something,
So how was it released in stages? Was it in magazines?
He released these small, thin paperbacks, and it was book 1, and it got you, and then you had to wait for book 2, then you got that, and, so there were 6. So at book 5, you're just like, and they would, I don't know if they came out each month or I just remember being like really irritated.
Right. That you had to wait.
You had to wait. And then what's funny is after I'm reading book 6, somebody, and I'd finished, somebody's like, why didn't you just wait till you had them all and then read it? And I'm
which is what you do with streaming shows now, I noticed.
Now.
Just wait till they've all dropped. Yeah.
But so I wanted to get to Regulators, which we talked about, the Bachman book. Desperation comes out, and Desperation and Regulators came out together. And when you put the books together, it made one giant book cover, and you flipped it over, and the back referenced the other one.
Okay.
So you were like, well, which book do I read first? And he was like, you got them both figured out, And so I read Desperation first, which is a really kick-ass story. But what's funny is all the characters in Desperation, you got the good guys and the bad guys or whoever everyone is. Those same character names are in the Regulators, but they're different people.
Weird.
So it's like now she's a good guy and this guy's a bad guy. You're like, oh, what the fuck? But what was crazy is the Regulators was very much like that Twilight Zone episode with Claude Akins, Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Do you remember that?
I don't remember. I know Claude Akins was in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
It's probably the episode I saw, yeah.
They're all on the one street, and they're aliens are coming and everything, and
Well, I have to press pause, and tell my story real quick. I'm an extra in this Johnny Cash TV movie back in the 1980s. I'm like 15 years old, and I would get little extra gigs as an extra in movies. Heavenly Kid was another one I was in, but Johnny Cash TV movie, and I forget what it was called, but he's a pool shark. And Claude Akins was one of the supporting actors in that.
That's on YouTube, and I've actually looked up and saw your ass sitting
Yeah,
there.
I've got the screen captures saved on my phone. Me sitting 8 feet away from Johnny Cash.
That's
Who
nuts.
at the time I was like, oh, that's some country music guy. I had no idea the legend that I was in the same room with. But anyways, we're all having lunch, and I'm sitting next to Claude Akins. And I had seen that episode recently, even though I don't remember the plot now. And I was like, so you were on the Twilight Zone? And he's like, yeah. And I said, so did Rod Serling always talk like that? You know, because Rod Serling's like, you stepped into the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and goes, like what?
Well, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is a classic Twilight Zone. And reading the regulators, I remember like, this is like that Twilight Zone. But at the time, again, you can't go to your DVD collection. You can't look it up on YouTube. But I had seen enough Twilight Zones where I was like, oh, this is that, you know, and but very cool. King is very much influenced by Richard Matheson, Donald Westlake, a ton of authors, and he never hides it. If he's doing a blatant borrowing of someone,
homage. It's called an homage.
He will literally say at the beginning of the book, this is very much, you know, and you read it and he'll take that main idea, but then he makes it his own, and what he's made his own, you're like, oh my God, this is so ridiculously good, you know. So then I want to talk about one of your favorites, 11/22/63. And
that mini series was fucking phenomenal.
They did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
But this is an epic back in time to save Kennedy. And many people had my own father talked about, I'm going to write a book. And I'm like, yeah, when are you going to do that? You know? But he really wanted to write a book where somebody goes back in time to save Kennedy. And I did tell him that they finally beat him to it. I know he never read it, but I raved about it to him at the time. And again, they did a stand-up mini series about that adaptation.
Yeah, it's really good. Mine was, I wanted to write a book about someone who goes back in time to kill Hitler. I'm sure that's been done though.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's not a back in time. That's not traveling back in time. This would be a time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had that movie, the guy who kills Hitler and Bigfoot or something, a real twisted.
Oh yeah, I think that's a recent movie, wasn't it? Yeah, I gotta check that out.
You do, but so Dr. Sleep comes out. That's a shining sequel. I thought the movie was trash.
I was just about to ask you what you thought of the movie. Yeah.
I did not like the movie, but the book is so good because you know, when I got it, I'm like, how are you gonna? And he does. It's just great.
I enjoyed the movie, but you know, it wasn't. I mean, The Shining is just such a phenomenal cinematic whirlwind. It's hard to follow that up.
Yeah. So late in his career, there was a bit of a slump. There's a book called Revival that I get his intent was again a nod to these classic horror things, Frankenstein and whatnot. But for some reason, I just did not like Revival. I didn't like From a Buick 8. But you know, that just makes somebody human, where not every book is the Stand, you know.
Well, you know what probably fucked it all up was he got sober.
Well, I will.
Happens. I mean, look what happened to Aerosmith after they got sober.
Yeah. I'll address what happened with him, but late in the game, he did a book called Mr. Mercedes, and it's about a retired cop, Bill Hodges, and you read this book and the characters are so good, and you finish it and you're like, man, I didn't want this book to end. Well, unbeknownst to me, Mr. Mercedes is book one of a trilogy. Finders Keepers and End of Watch are the trilogy, and they're just fantastic. A bit of supernatural, but each book is just amazing. Just a good, gritty cop detective trilogy.
Great.
And then The Outsider comes out, which is very much alien weirdness. But Holly Gibney, who is a character in the Bill Hodges trilogy, Holly Gibney is in The Outsider, right? So you're like, oh shit, she kicks ass, and he develops her more in The Outsider, and then again, without knowing, you get the next book of short stories he puts out. It's got 4 stories in it, and that book's called If It Bleeds. And there's a story in there that has Holly Gibney. So, she's taken over the detective agency. And, so that's in that short story. You're like, wow, 4 books and a book of short story. Then he puts out one called Holly that's all her. And that book is only a few years old. And that book is epic. Really good. So that now his newest book, which comes out in May, is called Never Flinch, and that's a Holly Gibney story. So he really likes this character, and I can't wait because I've enjoyed the others so much. And then he did Sleeping Beauties with his son Owen King. And you're like, oh, he's writing one with his son. He's silly. It was amazing.
So it's kind of like a different kind of truth where you bring the son in, but it still kicks ass.
Yeah. I like that. Obviously his novels are amazing. But I have to stress here that Stephen King is he's white hot as a short story writer. His 12 collection books, I think, are his best works. He's forced to, where some of his novels are like extremely long, or you've got the main topic and then all this side story and backstory, and that's flashback to a flashback to a flash forward to then a flash, all that. His short stories are just amazing. Last year, he put out a new one called You Like It Darker. And I could not, with each story, I would literally put the book, they'd be like, oh my God, it was just ridiculous how amazing he still is. And then there's also a Cujo sequel in So You Like It Darker. Obviously in the book, if the kid dies, the wife's long gone, but the husband, who was the commercial, he pitched commercials and stuff. He wrote and designed all that.
Right.
He is down in Florida and a whole other situation going on where he's just older, much older, and everything. But you're like, oh man, it was just cool the way he did it. And then his nonfiction, in 1981, he did a book called Dance Macabre that collected horror 50s up through the 70s, TV, movie, books, and it's an incredible task. And they have asked him, would you ever do a sequel and bring in? And he's like, God, no. Like, it's like too much. But it
what was it? It was just like him writing about movies and books and stuff.
It's very similar to Quentin's
cinema speculation.
Yeah. Where he talks about all horror movies are based on Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or Dracula.
Right.
And he ties that in and expands from there, and you're like, but then he talks about the best, a lot of horror books that are amazing, horror authors, movies that you need to see, and then works in personal biographical stuff. It's just crazy. If you like those movies, and especially 50s to 70s, it's just, you can't touch it. It's unbeatable. And then we talked about On Writing. I do want to say a book that is essential came out in 88. It's called Bare Bones, and it's conversations on terror, and it's collected interviews with Stephen King. And that is just a fantastic book. Their interviews, and it's him in the moment at that time, from 88 back.
Right.
And it's just tremendous. But the one thing we've not mentioned, and this kind of wraps it up, June 19th of 99, he's walking down Route 5 in Lovell, Maine. Him and his family were going to go see The General's Daughter, the new John Travolta movie at that time. And that's a good movie, but they were going to go see it that night, but he would always take these walks. And he's walking on the, he's facing traffic. He's walking on that side the way you would do.
Right,
and,
so you can see the cars coming.
Yeah. And this driver, Brian Edwin Smith, is distracted by his Rottweiler that's moving around in the back of the van, and he's got a cooler full of meat or something, and the dog's trying to get into it, and so he's reaching back, messing with the dog, and he hits Stephen King, knocks him 14 feet into a depression in the ground from the pavement of Route 5. Now, King didn't press charges, but Smith was later arrested and charged with driving to endanger, aggravated assault. He did plead guilty to the lesser charge of driving to endanger and was sentenced to 6 months in jail that was suspended, and he had his driver's license suspended for a year. So in his book On Writing, he talks about how he's heading north, walking against traffic, and right before the accident, a woman passed King going northbound, and she mentioned that this Dodge van is looping from side to side on the road, and the woman says, "God, I hope that guy doesn't hit that guy on the side of the road." King was conscious after the accident. He was able to give the deputy phone numbers to contact his family, but he was transported to Northern Cumberland Hospital in Bridgeton, flown by air ambulance to Central Maine Medical Center. His injuries, he had a collapsed right lung, multiple fractures to his right leg, scalp laceration, and a broken hip. They kept him till July 9th. So I forget when I said this happened. June. So he was in there for a month. But while his leg was stabilized, the bones in the leg, he was attached to all these machines. He had 5 operations in 10 days, physical therapy. And during all that, he just wanted to give up and die. And but he resumed work on writing in July, and his hip was shattered. He could only sit for about 40 minutes before the pain became unbearable. And with a pencil and paper, he started writing On Writing. And he thought it would be his last book. And so it was pretty heavy shit. But the book that came out after that, early 2000, just did not pack the same punch that I was used to.
Right.
But I just feel like he got through that. He's never fully recovered, and you see him, and he's very gaunt still. He
Yeah.
lost a lot of weight from that, and I'm sure he still deals with that kind of pain and shit. But he just continues to put out these fucking razor sharp books. The Outsiders and that Bill Hodges trilogy, untouchable, just ridiculous. And I'm excited to check out Never Flinch, which is a Holly Gibney book. That's very cool. He's doing an adaptation of Hansel and Gretel with Maurice Sendak, the guy that did
Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe it's Where the Wild Things Are artwork, and then King's adaptation of Hansel and Gretel. That's
That'll be interesting. Yeah.
There's another book coming out that is set in the universe of The Stand. And King is writing the introduction to it, and then it's other short story people writing in that universe. So that'll be fun to read.
Cool.
So that's pretty much Stephen King in 90 minutes.
Nice. Not bad.
I tried to really
quite the journey, but it's for me. I mean, that's a good background on the cat behind all these awesome movies that I've seen. You know?
Yeah, I would if you just see movies, I would tell you to check out the Nightmares and Dreamscape series, which that's a book of short stories. But TNT did a series, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and they did so good at adapting some of those stories, and that's fun. Obviously the Green Mile is phenomenal.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's a fantastic flick. Yeah, another great flick.
Yeah, Carrie, Shining, Salem's Lot, the one with David Soul. None of the other ones.
Gerald's Game, gotta find that.
Gerald's Game you should look at, but I just don't recall liking that one. Dolores Claiborne. What's funny is Stephen King is probably the greatest writer of our time. Almost every one of his movies, almost every one of his books have been adapted to movies. Most of them are famously bad, but
not all the ones we've mentioned. I mean, there's there are a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
The one he directed is not one of them, but there are a lot of good ones.
Yeah. I enjoyed Maximum Overdrive for the soundtrack because
it's AC/DC doing the soundtrack.
At that time, you did not get metal as a soundtrack.
I don't think anybody's ever talked AC/DC into doing a whole soundtrack before or since.
Iron Man 2, they did the soundtrack.
The entire soundtrack?
Yep.
Oh wow.
Iron Man 2. Yep.
All right. So that's one other movie.
That's it. Yeah. Having not read the books, it's easy to go see the movies and go, oh, I like that. But when you read the book and go see the adaptation, you're like, why did they change that? Son of a, and shit like that.
Oh, it was funny hearing him talk about The Shining. He really did not like.
Yeah. And they did a remake of The Shining with the guy from Wings, and I was like,
what the fuck? Yeah, that's
that TV show.
That's like remaking Pulp Fiction. I'm gonna remake Pulp Fiction with the guy from Friends. Whatever. Go fuck yourself.
Because the guy from Wings looked like a normal cat, and then to see him turn into an asshole, you're supposed to go. Oh.
Kind of the point, but it's still it's. I'm gonna remake Clockwork Orange. No, you're not. Just shut the fuck up and sit back down.
It was, and King really tried to make that new version one for the ages or whatever, and I didn't dig it.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm not. I would never even try to watch it.
no, it's just funny, but yeah, that's Stephen King, kids.
All right, we got more shit coming up. Same bat time, same bat channel. Stay tuned.
Excellent.
Peace out, motherfuckers.
Deuces.